When I presented my marriage certificate to obtain a new property certificate, I uncovered a significant secret about my husband, Miss Serena. Regardless of how many times we verify it, you and Mr. Ethan were divorced 6 years ago. Clutching my bag tightly, I said in a strained voice, "That's impossible. We've been married for 10 years with a strong relationship and have never processed a divorce. Mr. Ethan's second wife is named Rosie." The name Rosie pierced my heart like a sharp knife, causing me unbearable anguish. It turned out that the mother and child he brought back 6 years ago were not his distant cousin as he had claimed, revealing the depth of his deception. Yet, after I chose to vanish, why did he come to regret it? I collapsed into the chair, my breathing rapid and unsteady, as the vivid memory of that scene from 6 years ago flooded back into my mind. On the day Ethan returned from over a year of expanding business overseas, he disembarked the plane embracing a woman holding an infant. Meeting my questioning gaze, he hastily pushed the woman aside and explained nervously, "Honey, don't misunderstand, this is my cousin Rosie. She's recently divorced and struggling to raise a child alone, so as her cousin, I merely wish to assist her." He then issued a stern warning to Rosie, "I deeply love my wife. To avoid any suspicion, you are not to disturb us unless absolutely necessary." Over the subsequent years, I observed no improper interactions between him and Rosie, nor did I ever suspect their relationship. Later, upon unexpectedly encountering her and seeing her in distress, I softened and hired her into the company, unaware that she was not a cousin but his mistress. I departed the Civil Affairs Bureau in a daze, clutching my aching stomach, and arrived at the hospital. Just as I was about to knock on the clinic door, I heard voices emanating from within. "Ethan, 6 years ago, you brought Rosie and her child back, deceived your wife by claiming she was your cousin, and secretly processed a divorce. How long do you intend to continue this deception?" It was the voice of Ethan's doctor friend, Kenny. In my alarm, I retrieved my phone and pressed the record button. Kenny's urgent voice pressed again, "How long will you persist in this hesitation? For a woman of unknown origin, you're harming the wife who has endured hardships with you. Didn't you say she's the one you love most?" Ethan toyed with the cup in his hand, his expression inscrutable. Before responding helplessly, "I only wished to stabilize Rosie's emotions. When I was drugged abroad, she saved me and risked her life to bear Leo for me. Both she and Leo depend on me. Serena can be with me daily, while Rosie can only watch us together with tears in her eyes. What's wrong with granting her a title as compensation?" I felt as though I had been struck hard, my head ringing with shock. Moreover, raising a child alone already subjects her to enough scrutiny. I cannot further aggrieve her. "You dare mention children? When your wife consulted me to prepare her body for pregnancy, you instructed me to prescribe excessive contraceptives, rendering her permanently infertile. How could you be so cruel to her?" Upon hearing this, my mind reeled. Despite conditioning my body for an extended period, I still couldn't conceive, and I had blamed myself for a long time. I even contemplated finding a surrogate to bear a child for him to spare him regret, never imagining that he was the one who rendered me unable to become a mother. The physical and emotional pain overwhelmed me momentarily, causing me to collapse heavily onto the ground. The voices inside abruptly ceased. Ethan opened the door and, seeing me curled up on the floor, hurriedly approached to check on me. "Honey, why are you lying on the ground? When did you arrive?" I slowly raised my head, meeting Ethan's eyes filled with concern. It was this affectionate and worried gaze that had deceived me for an entire decade. I instinctively pushed away his outstretched hand and forced a smile, saying, "I didn't eat lunch." Ethan was momentarily stunned before reproachfully replying, "I've told you countless times, no matter how busy you are, you must eat properly. I'll take you to see a doctor right now." At that moment, I couldn't discern the sincerity of his concern. As I emerged from the emergency room, Ethan's phone rang. Upon seeing the name flashing on the screen, he glanced at me instinctively. "Honey, I'll step out to take this call." Within 2 minutes, he returned with a worried expression. "Honey, there's a sudden emergency at the company. I need to handle it and will return to see you later." He departed without awaiting my response, perhaps forgetting that, as the company's vice president, I would be informed of any genuine emergency. I didn't need to investigate to know whose call it was. I smiled wryly to myself. "Ethan, how long do you intend to deceive me?" Yet I refused to remain a fool in their eyes. I took out my phone and dialed, "Professor Lee, I am willing to participate in the human hibernation experiment." Professor Lee on the other end was astonished. "Serena, you're not joking with an old man like me, are you? You're now the wife of the city's richest man, can you bear to leave your beloved?" Before marrying Ethan, I was a physician. To aid him in building his business empire, I relinquished my own aspirations. "Professor, I'm not joking," I replied, now desiring only to distance myself from him. After a prolonged silence, Professor Lee sighed, "Very well, from the moment you join, Serena will cease to exist in this world. I'll notify you once I've arranged the schedule." Ethan had promised to return later to see me, yet it wasn't until the following afternoon that I received his call. "Honey, where are you? Weren't we supposed to go back together tonight to celebrate Mom's birthday?" "I'm at the hospital." Ethan paused on the line before explaining. "Honey, look at me, I've been so busy these past 2 days I forgot. I'll come pick you up now." After hanging up, my fingers gripping the phone turned pale. Just the previous night, I had seen Rosie boasting on Facebook. "Whose wonderful boyfriend is this? I only got a scratch, yet he nervously tended to me all night." Accompanying the post was an image of a pair of hands carefully applying a bandage to her. I recognized it as Ethan, for the couple's rings on their hands were the ones he had once promised me as an anniversary gift. I stood at the hospital entrance for over an hour before Ethan's car finally arrived. Instinctively, I reached to open the passenger door and saw Rosie seated there in a miniskirt. She met my gaze with a provocative look. "Sorry, sister-in-law, I've been feeling nauseous lately, so you'll have to sit in the back." I glanced at Ethan, noting his furrowed brow and impatient tone. "What's the fuss about? It's the same wherever you sit." My heart sank as I recalled his past promise. "Serena, my passenger seat is exclusively yours." Now he had broken that promise. Disappointed, I opened the back door and got in, while Rosie smugly toyed with the ring on her finger, prompting me to say deliberately, "That ring on your hand is so shiny, cousin, have you found a boyfriend?" Through the rearview mirror, I saw Ethan glare sharply at Rosie. Unperturbed, she boasted, "Yes, it was bought at great expense by my child's father," to which I scoffed. "Honey, where's the ring you promised me?" Caught off guard by my sudden question, Ethan flusteredly explained, "Didn't I tell you? I didn't win that ring, only got the consolation prize." I clenched the cheap substitute on my ring finger, overwhelmed by an indescribable bitterness. At some point, I, the legitimate wife, had been relegated to deserving only inexpensive trinkets. I forcefully removed the ring and discarded it into the trash without hesitation. At the entrance to the old house, as I stepped out and closed the car door, I was suddenly knocked to the ground by a force, hearing a child's voice, "You bad woman, don't show up at our home." Caught off guard by the impact, my palm was scraped by gravel. "Haha, Mom, am I great?" "I pushed that bad woman down," the child exclaimed. Rosie embraced her son Leo, not only refraining from apologizing but mocking me. "Sister-in-law, you're too weak to be knocked down by a child." Ethan stepped out of the car, his gaze toward me tinged with disdain. "Hurry up, don't be late and upset Mom." The man who once cherished me and never let me suffer grievances had now grown impatient with me for the second time today. With reddened eyes, I rose from the ground as a new message arrived on my phone. "Serena, we've arranged everything, your return is scheduled for 3 days from now," coincidentally aligning with the company's anniversary celebration. I entered the living room, which was filled with relatives gathered to celebrate my mother-in-law Lillian's birthday. "Lillian, you've been looking radiant lately, is there some joyful news?" My mother-in-law, holding Leo with her left hand and grasping Rosie's with her right, beamed with delight. "Indeed, since Rosie brought my precious grandson Leo to live here, I've been overjoyed." Hearing this, I was stunned. It became clear that my mother-in-law had long known of Rosie and her child and had welcomed them to reside in the old house. No wonder Ethan had been returning to our home less frequently lately. Upon seeing me, my mother-in-law's expression immediately soured. "Serena, I'll make this clear today, if you fail to bear a child this year, you must divorce my son." My inability to conceive had made my mother-in-law disdain me, often subjecting me to sarcasm, yet I never anticipated she would demand a divorce in front of so many people. Meanwhile, Ethan, my husband, sat silently scrolling through his phone, saying nothing. My heart turned cold instantly as I looked at him with reddened eyes. "Ethan, ask yourself honestly, is it my fault that I haven't borne a child all these years? Ethan's body stiffened, and he glanced at me in panic, but before he could speak, my mother-in-law interjected, if not you, then who? Leo is already so big, how could Ethan be the problem? Her words silenced everyone. Suddenly, an unidentified object struck my head, causing blood to trickle down my cheek. Haha, Mom, look how accurately I threw it. I hit the head of that hen that can't lay eggs, Leo laughed. Seeing an apple studded with toothpicks roll on the ground, I realized what had happened. Clutching my bloodied forehead, I said coldly, Rosie, make your son apologize to me now. Rosie abruptly knelt before me with a thud, tears falling to the floor. Sister-in-law, I'm sorry, it's my Leo's ignorance that hurt you. I'll kowtow to apologize, she said, grabbing my hand and digging her nails into my palm, freshly scraped by stones. The pain prompted me to instinctively withdraw my hand, but Rosie fell aside, clutching her stomach and crying out. Ethan rushed over anxiously, asking, Rosie, what's wrong? Where does it hurt? Biting her lip, she wept with reddened eyes toward me. Sister-in-law, I only wanted to apologize. Since you dislike me, I'll take Leo and leave. With a slap, before I could explain, my face was struck to the side, my ears ringing. Ethan glared at me, his eyes brimming with fury. Serena, I never thought you'd be so vicious. Leo's just a child, why make a fuss and take it out on Rosie? Immediately after, the other side of my face was slapped. You unlucky thing, who permitted you to bully Rosie? Covering my swollen cheeks, I looked at Ethan comforting Rosie. Ethan, if I say I didn't push her, would you believe me? Without hesitation, he blurted out, do you think we're all blind? This distrustful remark left me dizzy and disoriented. With a chilled heart, I scanned everyone present, all focused solely on Rosie and her child, mocking myself again. I'm just an outsider, what was I hoping for? Yet it didn't matter, in 3 days, I would leave forever. Intending to go upstairs to bandage my wounds, I discovered all my belongings were gone. In a panic, I opened the wardrobe's hidden compartment, finding my mother's bracelet missing. That was my mother's heirloom. I rushed out to find Ethan, and passing his study, I glimpsed through the door crack him pinning Rosie to the desk, kissing her forcefully. Fearing I'd scream uncontrollably, I clamped my hands over my mouth, though I had braced myself for their betrayal. Witnessing it firsthand still felt like a knife twisting in my heart. Like self-inflicted torment, I stood at the door recording it all. Brother Ethan, we've been together for 6 years, and you secretly divorced your wife. What if she finds out and confronts you? I'll never let her know, I only love you now. After those words, they kissed passionately again. After some time, Ethan reluctantly released Rosie, retrieving an item from his pocket and placing it on her hand. Rosie, don't be upset, it hurts me to see you like this. His sugary words rang painfully in my ears. How dare he use my mother's heirloom to appease his mistress? Enraged, I kicked the door open. Ethan, what are you doing? Seeing me burst in angrily, Ethan instinctively shielded Rosie behind him. Serena, how long will you keep this madness up? Gazing at this man who now felt utterly unfamiliar, I roared, return my mother's bracelet to me. Rosie feigned fright, removing the bracelet and letting it drop, then clutched her head and screamed, Ah, brother Ethan, I'm sorry, I didn't mean it. The bracelet shattered on the floor, destroying the last memento my mother left me. I glared at Rosie with reddened eyes as she waved her hands, feigning innocence. Don't hit me, it was an accident, she pleaded. As I stepped forward to confront her, Ethan blocked me swiftly. Enough, it's just an unlucky thing left by a dead person. Broken is broken. I stared at him in horror, recalling his past words. Honey, rest assured, this is the last thing your mother left, we'll care for it together, now reduced to an unlucky thing in his mouth. Biting my lip, I asked him word by word, Ethan, am I still your legal wife? Why do you now side with an outsider in everything? Ethan flinched, his voice vague. Of course, we married 10 years ago. Hearing this, I laughed in anger. Fine, if you dare deceive me, don't expect to find me again, I said, picking up the broken bracelet and returning to the home I'd lived in for 6 years. Without hesitation, I threw everything related to Ethan into the fire pit, letting a decade of marriage vanish with the flames. With simple luggage, I checked into a hotel. During this time, I received a message from the professor. Serena, 3 days from now, Your departure location is the hospital. In those 3 days, I received only 2 messages from Ethan. Honey, I spoke rashly in the heat of the moment, don't take it to heart. Knowing you've been in a bad mood lately, I won't return to bother you. I'm at the company preparing for the anniversary celebration. Wait for me. Reading these messages filled me with profound disgust. Ethan, after 6 years of this charade, aren't you tired? On the day of the company's anniversary, I arrived at the banquet on time. Rosie, as the public relations manager, stood intimately beside Ethan, basking in praise from industry leaders. Ethan, I heard your wife contributed greatly to your success today. Indeed, I heard she could drink 1,000 cups without getting drunk back in the day. I didn't expect your wife to be so youthful. Appearances can be deceiving. Ethan didn't correct their mistaken identification of Rosie as me, and with a bitter smile, I approached his side. Suddenly, a man burst from the crowd wielding a sharp knife. You wretch, abandoning me back then to seduce other men, here see how I deal with you. As the man shouted, he thrust the knife toward Rosie. Ethan, quick to react, pulled me in front of her as a shield. The pain in my abdomen drained the color from my face. Instantly, the scene erupted into chaos with terrified screams echoing everywhere. Ethan panicked, intending to check on me as I lay in a pool of blood, but Rosie's sobbing voice drew him away. Brother Ethan, I'm so dizzy, I can hardly breathe. After glancing at me, Ethan gritted his teeth and said, someone will take you to the hospital. I'll take Rosie away first. She can't handle the shock. She can't handle shock, but does my life mean nothing? Ethan, how ruthless and biased you are. In despair, I closed my eyes. At the hospital, Ethan summoned all the experts to attend to Rosie, who was merely frightened, while I, covered in blood and clinging to my last breath, was neglected. In my despair, I saw Professor Lee rushing toward me with a group of people. In the ward, Rosie feigned extreme weakness. Brother Ethan, that man just now was so terrifying. I don't even know him. Why did he want my life? Ethan tenderly pulled her into his arms, stroking her gently. Rosie, don't be afraid, as long as I'm here, no one can harm you. Brother Ethan, Rosie cautiously ventured, do you think that man might have been sent by sister-in-law to scare me? Prompted by Rosie's words, Ethan's eyes flashed with murderous intent. Let's see if she dares. I'll drag her here to confess to you. Unseen by Ethan, Rosie smirked triumphantly. After comforting Rosie, Ethan stormed to the emergency room to find me. Where's the lady who was brought in after us? The nurse pondered briefly before replying with regret. You mean the patient who was stabbed? She died from excessive blood loss. Thinking he misheard, Ethan raised his voice. What did you just say? Who died? Startled by Ethan's sudden frenzy, the nurse trembled as she answered. The patient named Serena could have been saved when she arrived, but all the doctors were suddenly called away, causing her to miss the optimal treatment window. Unable to believe what he heard, Ethan staggered back, murmuring, this can't be. My wife is so resilient. She survived a perforated stomach from drinking at events. This time it's just some blood loss. How could she die? After muttering, he suddenly seized the nurse's neck like a wild beast. Tell me, how much did Serena pay you to deceive me? Terrified and trembling, the nurse wept. Sir, please calm down. I'm not lying for anyone. That patient truly died and has been taken to the crematorium. Hearing the commotion, Rosie hurried over. Brother Ethan, what's happening? Rosie feigned concern on the surface, yet her upturned lips betrayed her. Maybe sister-in-law is playing a joke on you. Call her and ask. Heeding her suggestion, Ethan repeatedly dialed my number, but all calls were unreachable. Rosie continued, if sister-in-law isn't at the hospital, perhaps she went home. Imagining me lying on the living room sofa watching my favorite mindless dramas, Ethan's anger surged. With reddened eyes, he fumed. Serena, if I find out you dared to trick me, I really won't want you anymore. I was retrieved from the hospital by Professor Lee's team, falsely reported as deceased and sent to the crematorium. He placed me in a medical pod at the experimental base, providing me with the best treatment. The journey from the hospital to home typically takes 50 minutes, but Ethan raced back in half that time. Suppressing his unease, he forcefully slammed the door open. Serena, come out. He shouted several times without a response, growing increasingly anxious. Scanning the living room, he noticed many items missing, including our wedding photo that once hung prominently in the center. His heart clenched as he dashed upstairs. The room once filled with my belongings was now empty, as if no one had ever lived there. Frantic, he searched the wardrobe, bathroom, and every corner of the room, finding nothing of mine. This made him feel something slipping away within him. He tried desperately to hold on to it, but it eluded his grasp. Unable to comprehend why everything had changed after just a few days away, he wondered if I had discovered something. Ethan dared not think further. Clutching his suffocating chest, he muttered to himself, "No, it can't be. Serena loves me so much, how could she abandon me?" At that moment, his phone rang. Assuming it was me, hope flared within him, and without checking the caller ID, he answered eagerly, "Honey, where are you?" The assistant on the line paused. "Ethan, per your instructions, I searched for Mrs. Serena and found she checked into a hotel 3 days ago but checked out this morning." Hearing it wasn't the voice he anticipated, Ethan's face darkened. "Useless fools, if you can't find her, you're all fired." The berated assistant, not daring to delay, responded hastily and hung up. After the call, Ethan collapsed to the ground, drained. His mind was a tumult of panic and confusion. He had never imagined a day when he couldn't find me, as memories of our time together flooded his thoughts. There were sweet moments, brief quarrels, and the bittersweet challenges of managing the company together, alongside his recent coldness toward me. What suffocated him most was my recent warning: "If you dare deceive me, don't expect to find me again." Ding dong, the downstairs doorbell snapped Ethan back to reality. "Honey, it must be my wife returning." Wiping tears that had unknowingly fallen, he stumbled downstairs. The moment he opened the door, his hopeful expression crumbled. "Is this Mr. Ethan?" asked the staff member at the door, holding a box. Upon Ethan's nod, he continued, "This is the urn containing the ashes of the deceased, Miss Serena. Please accept it." Another accompanying individual presented a cremation certificate and a note. "This is the will found on the deceased." With trembling hands, Ethan took the note, which read, "If I unfortunately pass away, please deliver my ashes to this address. To my ex-husband Ethan." The address was our home. The word ex-husband left him dumbfounded. He furiously tore the note to shreds, yelling at the staff, "Get out now, my wife isn't dead. I know you must have been bribed by her to trick me. I won't fall for it. You'd better make her appear soon, or I'll really get angry." The 2 staff members were stunned by his outburst. Regaining their composure, they insisted Ethan sign for the ashes. "Sir, I don't understand what you mean by that. This truly contains Miss Serena's ashes. We understand your difficulty accepting this, but please don't insult my professional ethics." Far from listening, Ethan angrily knocked over the urn. "You're all liars, get out." Frightened by his loss of control, the staff fled without another word. At that moment, his friend Kenny arrived. "Ethan, bad news. I reviewed the hospital surveillance and found that Serena overheard our conversation that day." He then showed Ethan a surveillance video. The more Ethan watched, the more panicked he became, his body trembling uncontrollably. "So, Serena knew everything." Then the assistant called again. "Ethan, we discovered that Mrs. Serena visited the Civil Affairs Bureau a few days ago and learned of your divorce from her." In an instant, the taut string within Ethan snapped, his eyes closed, and he fell heavily to the ground, while I, having been resuscitated, clung to life. Professor Lee gazed at me with sympathy. "How did you end up like this?" I recounted everything about Ethan to him. After listening, he erupted in anger. "What a beast. You gave up your dreams to help him build his career, and instead of gratitude, he dared to hurt you so grievously. Making him unable to find you is the right choice. Let him regret it forever." Whether he would regret it, I couldn't be sure, but I would never regret leaving him. "Serena, don't go." Ethan awoke from a nightmare calling my name, wiping sweat from his forehead. The realization that I knew everything reignited his panic. As he prepared to get out of bed, he overheard Rosie on the phone in the bathroom. "Don't call me again. If Ethan finds out Leo isn't his, we're both doomed." Hearing this, Ethan clenched his fists, his face darkening with rage. He never imagined Leo wasn't his child. Rosie had dared to deceive him. He swiftly got out of bed, eyes bloodshot, heading toward the bathroom. Just as he was about to kick the door open, Rosie opened it and stepped out. Seeing Ethan's grim expression, she assumed he was unwell and quickly supported him. "Brother Ethan, why are you up?" go back and lie down." Her voice was as coquettish as ever, yet beneath this delicate facade lurked a malicious heart. "Who were you talking to in there just now?" Ethan asked coldly. Facing Ethan's icy inquiry, Rosie remained composed, acting as if nothing had happened. "No one, brother Ethan. Are you hallucinating from anger over Serena? She's gone, and since you're already divorced, she was bound to leave eventually. You still have me and the child." Hearing my name again, Ethan's heart ached once more. He forcefully shook off Rosie's hand, shouting at her for the first time, "Get out. If I find out you've done anything to Serena behind my back, I won't let you off." Rosie's tears fell instantly. "Brother Ethan, how can you yell at me? I'm your Rosie." Unwilling to tolerate Rosie's hypocrisy any longer, Ethan expelled her from the ward, then instructed his assistant to investigate whether there was a conspiracy behind the night he was drugged abroad 6 years ago. He also asked Kenny to expedite a paternity test between him and Leo. "Ethan, you must grieve. Serena is truly gone," Kenny said. Before the call ended, Ethan slumped powerlessly onto the bed, burying his face in his knees. Silent tears gave way to loud sobs. After an unknown duration of crying, the assistant called, "Ethan, I found out that Rosie spiked your drink back then posed as a victim to sleep with you. Also, Rosie has a husband abroad and frequently transfers money to him," the assistant added. With a boom, Ethan's mind exploded. So, he had indeed been manipulated by Rosie. Kenny was right, she was a wicked woman who approached him for money, and for her, he had caused my death. Suddenly recalling the urn he'd overturned, he raced home in panic, only to find an empty box at the villa's entrance, my ashes scattered by the wind. He fell to his knees with a thud, desperately trying to gather them. His large tears dropped to the ground, mingling with the ashes. "Honey, I'm sorry, I didn't mean it. I truly didn't know these were your ashes. If I hadn't pulled you to shield Rosie from that knife, you wouldn't have died. It's all my fault, punish me however you wish, just don't leave me," he pleaded, but no matter how hard he tried, he couldn't fully collect my ashes. Finally, Kenny arrived and pulled him up. "Ethan, don't do this, Serena wouldn't want to see you like this." Ethan laughed bitterly through tears. "You're right, I'm facing retribution." Kenny sighed heavily, saying no more. To atone for me, Ethan held a grand funeral. Mourners urged him to find peace, marveling at his deep affection for me. Suddenly, someone voiced a question. "Ethan, now that your wife is dead, who is this wife?" He then showed Ethan a video of my mother-in-law shopping with Rosie and Leo, where Rosie was recognized by a passerby. The passerby approached Rosie. "Madam, isn't today your funeral? Have you come back to life?" My mother-in-law pulled out a marriage certificate. "Look closely, Rosie is now the Shao family's daughter-in-law. The one who died was a discarded woman." "The one who died, is she really your ex-wife, the original spouse who helped build the Shao group?" Instantly, everyone at the funeral perked up, eager for more gossip. Ethan's face darkened, and as he was about to respond, his assistant rushed over in a panic. "Ethan, trouble, someone posted these recordings and videos online, and the company's stocks are plummeting." Ethan snatched the assistant's phone, playing the recordings and videos, the conversation I overheard at the hospital and footage of him with Rosie at the old house. Indeed, I had Professor Lee arrange for them to be uploaded. If they dared to act, they must face the consequences. Beneath the videos were netizens' curses, turning a solemn funeral into a farce. Abandoning everything, Ethan went to confront Rosie. Inside the old house, he flung the assistant's gathered evidence and the paternity test in her face. "Rosie, it's because of you that my beloved Serena died. You're the one who should die." Losing all reason, Ethan's face contorted as he brutally beat her with a baseball bat, leaving Rosie paralyzed for life. Due to online backlash, the company's stocks crashed. Ethan, mired in grief over losing me, had no heart to manage it, and with me once the backbone handling external networking gone, the Shao group gradually declined, nearing bankruptcy. At the cemetery, Ethan knelt before my tombstone. The assistant approached to report. "Ethan, you asked me to reclaim all properties under Rosie's name and donate them in Mrs. Serena's name, but the name Serena is nowhere to be found." The assistant's words jolted the despondent Ethan back to life. A person not officially deregistered couldn't be completely untraceable unless someone had deliberately intervened. His eyes suddenly lit up. "Quick, find my wife, she's not dead." After recovering, per Professor Lee's arrangements, I entered a human hibernation pod for a 5-year experiment, oblivious to Ethan's subsequent actions. 5 years later, our human hibernation experiment succeeded remarkably, earning national accolades. Delighted, Professor Lee granted me a few days off. With mixed emotions, I returned to a place etched in my memory forever, bringing my mother's favorite sunflowers to her grave. I noticed that the tombstone, unvisited for 5 years, was free of weeds, which puzzled me greatly. I also observed a lavish new tombstone nearby, its inscription covered by a red cloth, concealing the identity. Though curious, I dared not lift it. As I prepared to leave, a familiar voice called from behind, "Honey, is it really you back?" It was Ethan. My body stiffened instinctively. I hadn't expected to encounter him so soon. Seeing me motionless, Ethan ran over, turning me around. Recognizing the face he'd yearned for over years, he wept profusely, embracing me tightly. "Honey, it's really you. You've finally returned," he said, breaking down in tears before me for the first time. Yet I would no longer pity him. Struggling free, I said coldly, "Sir, you've mistaken me for someone else." Ethan trembled, his eyes filled with disbelief, then smiled through tears. "Honey, it's okay. I know you're still angry with me. I don't blame you as long as you don't leave again. Anything is fine." But I wanted no further connection with him. "Sir, if you persist in this unreasonable behavior, I'll call the police." With a cold face, I strode quickly down the mountain. Ethan relentlessly pursued me to the base. "Honey, I truly know I was wrong. Please don't abandon me. I have no ties with Rosie anymore. I still love you." I paused briefly. After all these years, how could Ethan still dare say such things? If he truly loved me, he wouldn't have divorced me secretly or used me as a shield when Rosie was in danger. His so-called love was something I couldn't accept. My colleague, seeing me harassed, stepped out of the car. Without lingering, I opened the door, got in, and urged him to drive away quickly. Seeing me enter a stranger's car, Ethan's eyes reddened with urgency. "Honey, where are you going? Stop the car." I told my colleague to accelerate. Ethan chased persistently but eventually stumbled, fell, and couldn't rise again. After leaving the cemetery, I returned to the experimental pod to begin the next hibernation phase. Whatever became of Ethan no longer concerned me. It said that, unable to find me again, Ethan finally lost his mind. Thereafter, a deranged man roamed the streets, calling every young woman honey, until police, responding to reports, committed him to a mental hospital. After being crippled by Ethan, Rosie's assets were confiscated. Unable to afford a caregiver, she died in her hospital bed, and her son, unadopted, was sent to an orphanage. Upon learning Leo wasn't her biological grandson, my former mother-in-law died of rage on the spot. The once richest Xiao family of Nanching became a laughingstock.